Alexandra Pierce believed she had found love in the arms of Maxwell Richards, heir to one of America's largest energy and technology conglomerates headquartered in Boston. He was admired by politicians, feared by Wall Street rivals, and adored by New England's elite. A man of poise, elegance, and sharp intelligence, who commanded every boardroom and charity gala with natural authority. For 3 years, Alexandra lived immersed in a world of penthouses, private jets, and apparent affection, embraced not just by Maxwell, but by the dynasty he called his own. Eleanor Richards, his formidable mother, filled the maternal void Alexandra had carried since childhood. His sister Victoria became the confidant she had always longed for. Everything seemed like the modern American dream until the illusion began to crack. Alexandra had built her reputation as an environmental attorney before meeting Maxwell. Their paths crossed at a climate initiative fundraiser, where despite representing opposing interests, they found unexpected common ground. She was captivated by his promise to transform his family's fossil fuel empire into a beacon of sustainable innovation. Their romance blossomed rapidly, chronicled by society pages and business magazines alike. The crusading attorney and the billionaire reformer, a power couple bridging America's political and economic divides. Together, we'll redefine what corporate responsibility means in this country, Maxwell would say, his blue eyes sparkling with conviction that made her believe in possibilities she'd never dared imagine. Within a year, she had relocated from her modest San Francisco apartment to his Boston penthouse overlooking the Charles River. Within 2, she had launched the Richards Pierce Foundation for Environmental Justice with generous funding from the Richards Group. The foundation quickly gained prominence for its innovative approach to sustainability in urban communities across Massachusetts. "You've reinvented our family legacy," Eleanor told Alexandra, over tea in the Richards Beacon Hill mansion, the family matriarch's approval worth more than any public accolade. "Maxwell needed someone like you, someone with vision beyond quarterly profits." But in the months leading up to their highly publicized wedding at the Richards Cape Cod estate, subtle disturbances began to plague Alexandra's consciousness. She noticed decisions regarding her foundation were increasingly made without her input. Grant allocations were redirected toward projects with tenuous environmental benefits, but clear connections to Richards' subsidiaries. Her name appeared on statements and policy positions she hadn't authored. Financial accounts linked to her foundation were mysteriously rerouted through complex corporate structures. When she questioned Maxwell during a rare private dinner at their penthouse, he disarmed her with that charming half-smile that had first captured her heart. "Trust me, Lex," he whispered, kissing her forehead. "We're building something much greater than either of us could achieve alone. These are just necessary corporate structures to maximize our impact." The explanation sounded reasonable, wrapped in the language of efficiency and strategy she'd grown accustomed to in his world. Yet something in his tone, a calculated smoothness, triggered her attorney's instincts for detecting half-truths. One Tuesday afternoon, while reviewing foundation documents in her downtown office, Alexandra discovered an unusual financial transfer. $5 million moved from the foundation's main account to an obscure LLC registered in Delaware. The transaction bore her electronic signature, though she had no recollection of authorizing it. "There must be some mistake," she murmured to her assistant, Emily. "Can you pull all the foundation transfers from the past 6 months and get me the incorporation documents for this Green Future Ventures LLC?" Emily's research revealed a concerning pattern. Over 8 months, nearly $30 million had flowed from the foundation through various subsidiaries, eventually consolidating in 3 offshore accounts. Each transaction carried Alexandra's authorization, though she had only directly approved a fraction of them. "This doesn't make sense," Alexandra confided to Victoria during their weekly yoga session. "I feel like I'm losing control of my own foundation." Maxwell's sister squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Corporate finance is labyrinthine by design, darling. Maxwell has teams of people whose entire careers are built on moving money efficiently. I'm sure there's a simple explanation." But Victoria's normally steady gaze flickered away too quickly, and Alexandra couldn't shake the feeling that something remained unsaid. That evening, Alexandra attempted to access the foundation's complete financial records using her executive credentials, only to discover her permissions had been downgraded. A system notification informed her that database architecture updates required temporary security modifications. When she called the foundation's CFO, his assistant reported he was unavailable until after the wedding. The wedding, just 10 days away, 300 guests, including 2 senators, a Supreme Court justice, tech billionaires and entertainment royalty. Martha's Vineyard temporarily transformed with imported flowers, Michelin-starred chefs, and security details befitting a presidential summit. Alexandra's custom Vera Wang dress hung in their walk-in closet like a white flag of surrender to a life that suddenly felt foreign. 2 nights before the wedding, during the rehearsal dinner at the Richards' Boston estate, Alexandra overheard an exchange between Maxwell and his childhood friend, now the Richards Group's chief counsel, that chilled her despite the warm summer evening. "The Singapore deal hinges on the foundation's endorsement," the lawyer murmured. "Without Pierce's environmental stamp of approval, the regulatory hurdles will multiply." Maxwell's response was barely audible. "After Saturday, alignment won't be an issue. Once her trust fund enters the family portfolio, we'll have everything needed to proceed." Alexandra maintained her composure through dinner, laughing at appropriate moments and kissing Maxwell's cheek when he toasted to their future. But inside, something fundamental had shifted, her attorney's mind cataloguing discrepancies, connecting fragments into a disturbing mosaic. Later that night, claiming a migraine, she retreated to their Boston penthouse while Maxwell remained with his groomsmen. Alone in his home office, Alexandra began to search, methodically, precisely, with the same attention to detail that had made her a formidable litigator. Hidden in encrypted files and buried in corporate archival servers, she discovered the truth. The Richards Pierce Foundation wasn't championing environmental justice. It was providing green cover for massive energy projects with devastating ecological implications across developing markets. Her environmental assessments were being altered before submission to regulatory agencies. Her name and reputation laundered Maxwell's corporate expansion just as effectively as offshore accounts laundered its profits. Most damning of all, she found evidence that Maxwell had orchestrated their initial meeting years ago after identifying her as an ideal partner, not for love, but for her impeccable environmental credentials, political connections, and the substantial trust fund she would inherit on her 35th birthday, just 6 months after their wedding date. Dawn was breaking over Boston Harbor when Alexandra finished compiling her evidence. She closed the laptop, watching sunlight spark against her 5-carat engagement ring. The diamond's flawless clarity now seemed like the cruelest irony. Perfect, brilliant, and completely manufactured. Her phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Everything okay? Max said you weren't feeling well?" Alexandra stared at the message, wondering how much Maxwell's sister knew, whether she too was merely a pawn or a willing player in her brother's machinations. Either way, Alexandra had reached a crossroads that demanded a decision. The wedding was 36 hours away. 300 guests were already descending on Massachusetts. Millions of dollars had been spent. A media narrative years in the EE. Crafting awaited its storybook culmination. Alexandra Pierce had built her career, exposing corporate malfeasance and environmental exploitation. Now she faced the most consequential choice of her life, to surrender to a gilded cage or risk everything. Ever truth. On the morning of what should have been her wedding day, Alexandra woke before sunrise. She stood at the penthouse window, watching Boston come alive beneath a canvas of pink and gold. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine the alternate reality. Walking down the aisle at the Richards estate, exchanging vows with Maxwell, melding her life permanently with the dynasty she now understood was built on deception. Her phone buzzed incessantly, the wedding planner, bridesmaids, Eleanor Richards checking on final preparations. Alexandra responded with brief reassurances, while methodically executing the plan she had formulated during her sleepless night. "Emily," she called her most trusted assistant from the foundation, "I need you to courier a package to Judge Harrington immediately. Yes, today, it's critical." Judge Rebecca Harrington had been Alexandra's mentor at Harvard Law School and now sat on the Federal Court of Appeals. More importantly, she headed the Environmental Protection Agency's Oversight Committee and had the power to launch investigations that even the Richards family couldn't easily quash. By 9 o'clock, Alexandra was dressed in what she had jokingly called her battle suit, a tailored white pantsuit she wore for her most challenging courtroom appearances. She applied her makeup with surgical precision, her lipstick no longer a romantic accessory, but war paint. Hidden in her clutch was a flash drive containing every incriminating document she had discovered. "You look stunning," Victoria gasped when Alexandra arrived at the estate. "But that's not your wedding dress." "I thought I'd surprise Maxwell," Alexandra replied evenly. "Is he here?" Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly. "In the library with father and the investors from Singapore. You know how he is, working until the last possible minute." Alexandra nodded. "I need to see him. But it's bad luck before the ceremony." "We make our own luck, Victoria." Alexandra's tone left no room for argument. The Richards Library was a temple to old money. Leather-bound first editions, oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors, and a mahogany conference table where national policies were influenced and billion-dollar deals sealed away from public scrutiny. Maxwell stood at its head, resplendent in his wedding tuxedo, charm radiating as he addressed a group of Asian executives. "Gentlemen, within 6 months, the Richards Pierce Foundation will certify environmental compliance for all Southeast Asian operations, circumventing local regulatory delays." Maxwell stopped abruptly when Alexandra entered. "Alexandra, what are you doing here?" "It's tradition." "We need to talk," she interrupted, her voice steady. "Privately." Maxwell's expression shifted imperceptibly, confusion giving way to calculation. "Of course." He turned to the executives with an apologetic smile. "Wedding day jitters. Please excuse us for a moment." When the door closed behind them, Maxwell's smile remained, though it no longer reached his eyes. "What's this about, Lex? 300 guests are arriving, and you're in the wrong outfit." Alexandra met his gaze unflinchingly. "I know everything, Maxwell. The foundation manipulations, the Singapore deal, the environmental certifications you plan to falsify under my name, your plans for my trust fund." Maxwell's response was neither immediate nor emotional. Another calculation. "You've been working too hard," he said finally, reaching for her hand. "The stress of the wedding—" Alexandra stepped back. "Don't. I have copies of everything, every altered assessment, every diverted foundation fund. The entire strategy document outlining how you identified me 3 years ago as the perfect environmental attorney to provide cover for Richard's expansion." For the first time, Maxwell's facade cracked. "You hacked into secure servers." His voice hardened. "That's a federal offense, Alexandra. My family has considerable influence, Ida." "Are you threatening me?" Alexandra laughed quietly. "Your mistake was forgetting what I did before I met you. I built my career exposing corporate fraud. Did you think I would become complicit in yours just because I loved you?" "Loved?" Maxwell noted the past tense. "Alexandra, whatever you think you found has been misinterpreted. We can discuss this. After the ceremony, the governor is already here. Senator Collins flew in from Washington. The ceremony isn't happening." Alexandra's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "In fact, the only thing happening today is a federal investigation. I've already sent documentation to Judge Harrington." Maxwell's face drained of color. "You can't—" "I already have." Alexandra removed her engagement ring and placed it on the antique desk between them. "Now you have 2 options. Option 1, I walk out there and publicly expose everything. Your family's reputation implodes today. Option 2, you announce that we've mutually decided to postpone the wedding. You immediately restructure the foundation with independent oversight, and you personally ensure that every environmental assessment bearing my name is withdrawn and corrected." Maxwell's aristocratic features hardened into something ugly and unfamiliar. "You're bluffing. You'd destroy yourself along with me." "Try me." Alexandra held his gaze. I'd rather rebuild from truth than live in a palace of lies. The standoff lasted precisely 12 seconds before Maxwell's survival instincts reasserted themselves. I'll need time to manage this discreetly. You have 1 hour to announce the postponement. By tomorrow morning, I expect a public statement about foundation restructuring. She turned to leave, then paused. And Maxwell, if anything happens to me or those documents disappear, Judge Harrington has instructions to release everything to the Washington Post. Alexandra walked away without waiting for his response, her steps measured and deliberate as she navigated through the growing crowd of guests in the garden. Eleanor Richards intercepted her near the rose trellis, elegant in mother of the groom, silver with concern etching her aristocratic features. Alexandra, what's happening? The coordinator says you're not in your dress. For a moment, Alexandra hesitated. Eleanor had been the mother figure she'd craved after losing her own parents, or so she'd believed. Ask your son, she replied softly, but I suspect you already know. Something complicated passed through Eleanor's eyes, neither complete surprise nor complete guilt. My dear, she began, reaching for Alexandra's arm. The Richards family has operated a certain way for generations, and will continue to do so without me. Alexandra gently removed the older woman's hand. Goodbye, Eleanor. The formal announcement came 47 minutes later. Maxwell emerged, appropriately somber, to inform the assembled guests that due to unforeseen circumstances, and after careful mutual consideration, the wedding would be postponed indefinitely. Society columnists would later report that Eleanor Richards had been hospitalized briefly for what family representatives described as exhaustion. What the papers didn't report was the emergency board meeting called that evening at Richards Group headquarters, or the panicked communications with regulatory officials and foreign investors. By morning, the Richards Pierce Foundation announced a strategic reorganization with a new independent board of directors. Within 48 hours, the Singapore deal was quietly shelved. Alexandra watched it all unfold from the sanctuary of a boutique hotel in Cambridge, her phone turned off except for communications with Emily and Judge Harrington. 3 days after what should have been her wedding day, Victoria Richards appeared in the hotel lobby. Security said you refused to see me, Maxwell's sister said, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. I've been trying to reach you. Alexandra gestured to a quiet corner. 5 minutes, Victoria. The women sat across from each other, 3 years of sisterly intimacy collapsing into awkward silence. Finally, Victoria spoke. Did you know I argued against approaching you initially? When Maxwell's team identified you as the perfect environmental partner for our expansion. Alexandra's chest tightened. So you were part of it from the beginning? Not actively, Victoria looked away. I just didn't stop it. I told myself it might actually work, that you might genuinely fall in love with each other while serving the family interests. And did that help you sleep at night? Alexandra asked quietly. Victoria's laugh was hollow. I haven't slept properly in years, Alexandra. None of us have. That's what legacy does. It becomes a prison. Maxwell believes he's preserving something vital. Mother believes she's protecting her children's birthright by destroying what I spent my career building, by planning to use my inheritance to fund projects I fought against my entire professional life. It was wrong, Victoria admitted. I knew it was wrong. That's why I came here, to tell you I'm leaving too. Resigning from the company. Starting over. Alexandra studied the woman she'd once considered family. Why should I believe you? Victoria slid a thumb drive across the table. Because I brought you this. Internal communications about damage control. They're planning to discredit you professionally if you pursue this further. Suggestions that you were emotionally unstable, fabricated evidence of financial improprieties. Alexandra's attorney instincts flared. This could be a trap, another manipulation. It could be, Victoria acknowledged. But it's not. I'm done with the family business. She stood to leave. They underestimated you, Alexandra. I never did. After Victoria left, Alexandra sat motionless, the thumb drive heavy in her palm. 3 years of her life had been constructed on carefully orchestrated deception. Her professional reputation, the one thing she'd built entirely on her own merit, was now under threat from one of the most powerful families in America. She had exposed the truth, but at what cost? And what would she build from the ruins of the life she thought she was creating? As night fell over Cambridge, Alexandra Pierce made her second life-altering decision in less than a week. She wouldn't just survive this betrayal, she would transform it into something powerful. 6 months after the wedding that never happened, Alexandra sat in a downtown Chicago conference room watching 12 strangers around a mahogany table debate her future. The board members of the newly established Pierce Truth Initiative represented diverse industries: law, finance, environmental science, and social justice advocacy. None had connections to the Richards family or their vast network of influence. "The optics are challenging," said Diane Reeves, former federal prosecutor and board chair. "You're proposing to transform a personal scandal into a national watchdog organization." "Not the scandal," Alexandra corrected. "The expertise. I spent 15 years identifying corporate environmental fraud before the Richards situation. That knowledge has value." Marcus Washington, environmental justice advocate from Detroit, leaned forward. "The Richards Group has launched a subtle but effective whisper campaign questioning your stability and judgment. Major donors are hesitant." Alexandra had expected this. In the months following her broken engagement, the Richards machine had worked methodically to rewrite the narrative. No direct attacks, nothing so crude, but strategic implications in business publications about emotional decision-making and personal vendettas disrupting established partnerships. "I'm not asking for immediate endorsement," Alexandra replied. "I'm offering 6 months to prove concept. My personal funds will cover operations. If I haven't demonstrated measurable impact by then, I'll step aside and you can restructure without me." The boardroom fell silent as members exchanged glances. Alexandra had deliberately selected individuals known for their integrity and independence. She needed allies, not sycophants. 6 months, Diane finally agreed, but with concrete metrics for success. By winter, the Pierce Truth Initiative had established modest offices in Chicago, deliberately distant from both Boston's Richards territory and Alexandra's former San Francisco life. The organization's mission was deceptively simple: providing legal and financial support to corporate whistleblowers in environmental sectors. Alexandra worked 18-hour days, leveraging every professional contact who hadn't been poisoned by Richard's influence. Her core team consisted of Emily, her loyal assistant from the foundation, Zach Foster, a brilliant data analyst who had once worked for Richard's competitors, and Mia Rodriguez, an environmental attorney who had watched her own whistleblowing case get buried by corporate lawyers years earlier. "Another rejection," Emily reported one snowy February morning, placing a letter on Alexandra's desk. "The Clark Foundation won't risk antagonizing Richard's energy partnerships." Alexandra added it to a growing stack of rejections, and the Martinez case. Settlement offer increased to $750,000 with the usual confidentiality requirements. "Tell him to reject it," Alexandra said, rubbing her temples against a building migraine. "They're still hiding the chemical testing data. Without public disclosure, this happens to the next community too." The fight wasn't just professional, it was personal. Richard's allies had frozen Alexandra out of environmental law circles she had once dominated. Former colleagues avoided her calls. Speaking engagements evaporated. Her legal expertise remained undiminished, but her platform had been systematically dismantled. The 6-month mark approached with fundraising still dangerously low, and only 2 successful whistleblower cases concluded. The board's quarterly review loomed like a guillotine. It was Zach who spotted the opportunity. "Look at this," he said, bursting into Alexandra's office one evening when everyone else had gone home. "The Richards Group is pursuing permits for natural gas development in northern Pennsylvania. They're citing environmental impact studies that look suspiciously like revised versions of work you did 3 years ago." Alexandra examined the documents, recognizing methodologies she had developed. "They've altered the groundwater contamination projections, and the wildlife impact assessment has been completely fabricated. There's more, Zach continued, excitement building. The local review board includes Professor James Chandler from Penn State. Didn't you mention studying under him? Alexandra nodded slowly. Environmental law first year, he was my thesis advisor. This could be our opening, Zach suggested. A direct challenge using your original methodology against their manipulated version. The strategy was high risk. Directly confronting Richards would invite further retaliation, but the approaching board review left little choice. Alexandra needed a victory, not just for the organization but for her own redemption. 3 days later, she sat across from Professor Chandler in a small cafe near the Penn State campus, watching her former mentor absorb the evidence she had presented. "This is troubling, Alexandra," he said finally, removing his reading glasses. "But I've known the Richards family for decades. Generations of philanthropy, political service, and masterful image management," Alexandra finished. "I lived inside that machine, James. I saw how it works." The professor studied her carefully. "The breakdown of your engagement caused considerable conversation. Many believed that I had a nervous breakdown, that I fabricated accusations against a respected family because of wedding jitters." Alexandra's laugh held no humor. "The Richards playbook is predictable once you recognize it." "What exactly are you asking of me?" "Review the original methodology against their revised version, as a scientific matter, not a personal one. If you find my analysis sound and theirs compromised, all I ask is that you say so publicly." Chandler hesitated. "Eleanor Richards chairs 3 university endowment committees. Maxwell sits on the board of governors." "I know what I'm asking," Alexandra said quietly. "I also know what you taught us about scientific integrity." The professor's decision came 4 days later, not in a private call, but in a detailed public statement, challenging the environmental assessments submitted by Richards Energy. The review board hearing that followed became contentious, with Richards' attorneys questioning Chandler's motivations. But the science held. The permits were suspended, pending comprehensive independent review. The victory changed everything. National environmental organizations began reaching out. Potential whistleblowers from 3 different energy conglomerates contacted the initiative. A prominent digital news platform ran a feature titled "Alexandra Pierce, Corporate Watchdog, Reborn." The board's 6-month review transformed from execution to celebration. "This isn't just about Richards anymore," Diane observed as they reviewed expanded strategic plans. "You've identified a structural gap in environmental oversight. That needs addressing regardless of personal history." As winter gave way to spring, the Pierce initiative expanded from 3 employees to 15. Whistleblower cases increased exponentially. Alexandra found herself speaking at conferences again, rebuilding her reputation on new foundations. Was after one such conference at Northwestern University that she encountered Daniel Hayes, a visiting ethics professor known for his work on corporate accountability. Tall and thoughtful, with prematurely silver hair, he approached her after her keynote address. "Remarkable presentation," he said, introducing himself, "though I'm curious why you focused solely on regulatory solutions rather than cultural transformation within corporations." Most people approached Alexandra with either reverence or skepticism these days. Hayes's intellectual challenge was refreshingly direct. Because regulatory frameworks can be implemented immediately, while cultural change requires generational commitment, she replied. "Perhaps," he conceded. "But what if they're not mutually exclusive strategies?" Their debate continued through coffee, then dinner, then weeks of email exchanges that gradually shifted from professional discourse to personal connection. Daniel saw her not as a scandal or a symbol, but as a complex woman navigating extraordinary circumstances with integrity. 3 months into their relationship, Daniel invited Alexandra to guest lecture in his corporate ethics seminar. As students filed out after a particularly intense discussion on whistleblower protections, one young woman lingered. "Professor Hayes mentioned your background with the Richards Group," she said hesitantly. "My father works for their Houston division. The things you described today, the pressure to alter environmental data, the retaliation against internal critics. He experiences that daily. Alexandra felt a familiar surge of purpose. If he ever wants to talk, confidentially, the initiative has resources to help. The student bit her lip. He's afraid. 3 kids in college, mortgage payments. The Richards family has incredible reach. I know, Alexandra said softly. Believe me, I know. That evening, Alexandra and Daniel walked along Lake Michigan, discussing the ethical complexities of whistleblowing. The system is designed to isolate truth-tellers, Alexandra observed, make them feel alone, unstable, financially vulnerable. Breaking that isolation is as important as legal protection. Daniel squeezed her hand. You've created something remarkable, you know. Most people would have retreated after what you experienced. Alexandra watched the sunset paint the Chicago skyline in amber light. I almost did. There were weeks I couldn't leave my hotel room, days I questioned my own memory and judgment. What changed? I realized that Maxwell's greatest weapon wasn't his money or connections, it was shame. He expected me to disappear, to be so humiliated by my public emotional breakdown that I'd never challenge the narrative. Her work was demanding, the battles constant. Just the previous week, a promising whistleblower case had collapsed when the key witness suddenly accepted a lucrative position with a Richards subsidiary in Europe. The organization's funding remained precarious, dependent on foundations brave enough to challenge entrenched power. Yet standing beside Daniel, watching twilight descend over the city she now called home, Alexandra felt something she hadn't experienced since before the fateful almost wedding day. Possibility. Not just professional purpose, but personal peace. The sense that her life was realigning around authentic values rather than orchestrated deception. As they turned to leave, Alexandra's phone rang, the initiative's emergency line. Emily's voice was tense with excitement. You need to see this immediately. Victoria Richards just contacted us through secure channels. She says she has complete documentation of environmental violations in 7 states, and she's ready to go on record. The Richards family compound in Greenwich, Connecticut, loomed before Alexandra like a fortress from another life. Georgian columns framed the entrance where she had once been welcomed as a future family member. Now security guards verified her identity with suspicious scrutiny before reluctantly opening the ornate iron gates. Eleanor Richards waited in the conservatory, framed by exotic flowering plants that thrived despite the November chill. At 72, she remained formidable, silver hair immaculately styled, posture regal, her eyes missing nothing. The matriarch had requested this meeting through intermediaries, circumventing lawyers and publicity. You look well, Alexandra, Eleanor observed, gesturing toward a chair. Chicago agrees with you. I'm not here for pleasantries, Alexandra replied, remaining standing. Your message indicated this concerns Victoria. A flicker of emotion crossed Eleanor's composed features. My daughter has been hospitalized following what doctors describe as an anxiety-induced collapse. Before being sedated, she insisted on seeing you, only you. Alexandra had maintained cautious contact with Victoria since receiving the whistleblower documentation 8 months earlier. The evidence Victoria provided had launched investigations into Richards' operations across multiple states, dealing significant reputational and financial damage to the family empire. Victoria made her choice, Alexandra said carefully. She chose truth over family loyalty. She chose self-destruction, Eleanor corrected sharply. The Richards name has endured for generations because family stands united. Victoria's actions have consequences beyond whatever misguided moral crusade. You've enlisted her in. Alexandra studied the woman who had once embraced her as a daughter. Did you know about Maxwell's plans for me, for the foundation? Eleanor's silence provided the answer Alexandra had suspected, but never confirmed. Not just complicity, active participation. Victoria is at Greenwich Hospital under family supervision, Eleanor finally said, handing Alexandra a visitor's pass. She refuses treatment until she speaks with you. The hospital's private wing reflected the Richards family's influence, discreet security, luxurious furnishings, medical staff moving with deferential efficiency. Alexandra found Victoria in a sunlit room overlooking manicured gardens, looking pale but resolute. "You came," Victoria said, relief evident in her voice. "I wasn't sure you would." Alexandra took the chair beside the bed. "Your mother made it sound urgent." "It is." Victoria glanced toward the door, lowering her voice. "They're trying to declare me mentally incompetent, claiming the stress of the company investigations triggered paranoid delusions." "That's absurd," Alexandra frowned. "You're the most stable person I know." "Not according to the specialists they've engaged." Victoria's laugh was bitter. "Turns out family money can buy very specific psychiatric opinions when necessary." Alexandra understood immediately. "If you're declared incompetent, your whistleblower testimony becomes inadmissible. The family regains control of your inheritance shares. And I get a nice extended rest in exclusive facilities until I recover my family loyalty," Victoria confirmed. "Maxwell visited yesterday, all concern and fraternal love, while explaining how they can protect me from myself." The Richard family playbook repeated itself with brutal efficiency. When truth threatened power, discredit the messenger. They had tried with Alexandra. Now, Victoria. "I need you to take something," Victoria continued, slipping a small key from beneath her pillow. "Safe deposit box, First National downtown. Contains documents mother doesn't know exist. Grandfather's original journals documenting environmental decisions from the 1980s. He knew about the contamination issues even then." Alexandra pocketed the key. "I'll retrieve them today." Victoria gripped her wrist with surprising strength. "Alexandra, be careful. What I've exposed so far, it's just the surface." 2 days later, Professor Daniel Hayes opened his university office door to find Alexandra surrounded by stacks of leather-bound journals and corporate documents. "You missed dinner," he observed mildly, "and apparently sleep as well." Alexandra looked up, eyes red-rimmed but alert. "Richard Richards Sr. documented everything, Daniel. 40 years of knowing their industrial processes were contaminating groundwater across the Northeast. Cost-benefit, eh? Analyses showing it was cheaper to suppress evidence than implement safety measures." Daniel examined the nearest journal. "This predates current environmental regulations." "But not basic human decency," Alexandra countered. "And the pattern continued through 3 generations. The family tradition wasn't just wealth creation, it was systematic environmental exploitation coupled with strategic philanthropy to maintain social position." Daniel sat beside her. "What are you planning?" "Victoria's psychological evaluation is scheduled for Monday. Once the family psychiatric team declares her incompetent, her testimony collapses." Alexandra gestured to the documents. "This evidence exists independent of Victoria's mental state. It comes from the family patriarch himself." "The Richards will claim the journals are forgeries," Daniel warned, "or private creative writing never intended as factual record." "That's why I need more than legal strategy," Alexandra admitted. "I need moral clarity." Daniel studied her thoughtfully. "You're not just fighting for Victoria, are you? This is about redemption, yours and the Richards' legacy both." In the 2 years since walking away from her wedding, Alexandra had rebuilt her professional reputation, established a nationally recognized whistleblower organization, and found authentic partnership with Daniel. Yet the Richards family continued to cast a shadow over everything she built. "When I left Maxwell, I thought exposing the truth would be enough," Alexandra confessed, "but power like theirs absorbs scandals, rewrites narratives, discredits opposition. They're doing to Victoria exactly what they tried to do to me." "What does justice look like in this situation?" Daniel asked quietly. The question haunted Alexandra through sleepless nights and strategy sessions with the initiative's legal team. Justice wasn't destroying the Richards family. It was transforming the systems that allowed their deception to flourish unchecked for generations. 3 days before Victoria's psychological evaluation, Alexandra implemented a plan that surprised everyone, including her own board of directors. Rather than filing lawsuits or leaking documents to media, she requested a private meeting with Eleanor Richards. "Absolutely not," Emily protested when Alexandra announced her intention. "It's walking into the lion's den." "Lions are predictable when defending territory," Alexandra replied calmly. "Eleanor Richards is many things, but ultimately she's a pragmatist protecting dynasty." The meeting took place at neutral ground, a private room at the Chicago Art Institute surrounded by Renaissance masterpieces. Eleanor arrived precisely on time, elegant in understated charcoal gray. "I assume this concerns Victoria's medical situation," Eleanor began, declining Alexandra's offer of tea. "It concerns the Richards legacy," Alexandra corrected, opening her portfolio. "I've spent the past week with your father-in-law's journals. Fascinating reading about the early development of Richards' energy, particularly his detailed notes on the Clearwater Basin decisions." Eleanor's composure flickered momentarily. "Family archives are private property. Victoria had no right." "Richard Richards Sr. had exceptional foresight," Alexandra continued, ignoring the interruption. "He anticipated environmental regulations decades before they were implemented. He also calculated exactly how much cheaper it would be to suppress evidence of contamination than to implement proper safety protocols." "Those were different times," Eleanor said stiffly. "Standards have evolved." "But the family strategy hasn't," Alexandra countered. 3 generations of Richards' leadership have consistently prioritized profit over environmental responsibility, while simultaneously building a public image of philanthropic concern. It's brilliantly cynical. Eleanor's eyes hardened. "If you've come to threaten exposure—" "I'm not here to threaten anything," Alexandra interrupted calmly. "I'm here to offer a choice about how the Richards legacy continues." She laid out 3 folders on the antique table between them. "Option 1. I release the journals and supporting evidence to national media. Victoria's psychiatric evaluation becomes irrelevant when the story focuses on decades of documented corporate malfeasance." "The Richards name has weathered worse," Eleanor remarked coldly. "Option 2, Alexandra continued, opening the second folder. "The initiative files a comprehensive federal lawsuit based on these documents. The discovery process alone would dominate business headlines for years." Eleanor's expression remained impassive, though her fingers tensed against her designer handbag. "Option 3, Alexandra said, pushing forward the final folder. "Transformation rather than destruction." This proposal caught Eleanor's attention. "Explain." "The Richards Group publicly acknowledges historical environmental shortcomings, not criminality, just recognition that earlier generations operated under different standards. You implement comprehensive remediation programs in affected communities. You establish an independently governed environmental compliance division with genuine authority over corporate decisions." "And Victoria?" Eleanor asked carefully. "Victoria returns to the family with full recognition of her mental competence. She assumes leadership of the new compliance division, applying her insider knowledge to genuine reform." Eleanor studied Alexandra with new appreciation. "You're not seeking to destroy us." "Destruction is easy," Alexandra replied. "Transformation is harder and more valuable. The Richards Empire has enough resources to become a genuine force for environmental responsibility while remaining profitable. The question is whether you have the vision to evolve beyond the old playbook." "And what do you get from this arrangement?" Eleanor asked shrewdly. "Public acknowledgement that Victoria's whistleblowing was legitimate, a formal apology for the attempts to discredit my professional reputation, and seed funding for a new initiative program training corporations in ethical environmental practices." Eleanor considered this for several long moments. "Maxwell won't easily accept these terms." "Maxwell isn't here," Alexandra observed. "You requested this meeting, Eleanor, because you understand what he doesn't, that adaptation ensures survival." 3 weeks later, business news outlets reported a surprising development. The Richards Group announced a comprehensive corporate restructuring, including a new environmental integrity division headed by Victoria Richards. The accompanying press release included a statement from Eleanor Richards, acknowledging that past corporate practices, while legal at the time, fell short of today's higher environmental standards and committing to industry-leading remediation efforts. A separate press release, less widely reported but noted in legal circles, included a formal apology to Alexandra Pierce for mischaracterizations of her professional conduct and announced a substantial grant to the Pierce Truth Initiative's new corporate ethics training program. Victoria was released from medical supervision the same day. The family psychiatric team issued a statement confirming her complete mental wellness and lauding her principled courage in addressing corporate environmental concerns. 1 year later, Alexandra stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., addressing a conference on corporate accountability, co-sponsored by the Richards Environmental Integrity Division and the Pierce Truth Initiative. The audience included corporate executives, regulatory officials, and environmental advocates, rival factions finding unexpected common ground. Meaningful change rarely comes from destruction, Alexandra told the assembled leaders. It comes from transformation, the difficult, messy process of acknowledging flaws while preserving what has value. From the front row, Victoria Richards nodded slightly. The tension that had characterized their early relationship now replaced by professional respect. Eleanor sat beside her daughter, still regal at 73. Her legendary business acumen now directed toward rebuilding the Richards' reputation through genuine environmental leadership rather than cosmetic philanthropy. Maxwell had initially resisted the corporate restructuring, but eventually yielded to his mother's influence. He now operated primarily in Asian markets, maintaining careful distance from both Alexandra and the company's new environmental initiatives. Some wounds remained too deep for reconciliation. After the conference, Daniel joined Alexandra for a quiet dinner at their favorite Washington restaurant. They had married 6 months earlier in a small ceremony attended by their closest allies in the fight for corporate accountability. Now they divided their time between Chicago, where the initiative continued to expand, and Boston, where Daniel had accepted a position establishing an ethics center at his alma mater. "I saw you speaking with Eleanor," Daniel noted. "Civilized?" "More than civilized," Alexandra replied. "She's offered funding for the initiative's international expansion." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Can you accept that without compromise?" "With proper governance structures, yes," Alexandra smiled. "Eleanor's adaptation has been remarkable. She's realized that building a genuine environmental legacy is her best revenge against critics and her best protection against future scandal." As they walked along the National Mall after dinner, Alexandra reflected on the path that had brought her here. 3 years earlier, she had stood at the precipice of personal destruction, betrayed by a man she thought loved her. Today, she led a nationally respected organization, had found authentic partnership, and had transformed her greatest adversaries into unlikely allies. "Sometimes I wonder if I'd have found this purpose without the Richards' deception," she admitted, to Daniel as they paused before the Lincoln Memorial. "Does that make their actions any less wrong?" "Moral complexity is what makes ethics worth studying," Daniel replied thoughtfully. "You transformed betrayal into purpose. That's your achievement, not theirs." Light from the monument reflected in the pool before them, illuminating their path forward. Alexandra Pierce had once believed she was building a life based on love and shared values, only to discover it was constructed on calculated deception. From those ruins, she had built something far more authentic, a life and career dedicated to ensuring that corporate power could no longer weaponize deception against vulnerable communities or individuals seeking truth. "What's next?" Daniel asked as they turned toward their hotel. Alexandra smiled. "Next, we expand the training program to law schools. Create a generation of attorneys who understand that environmental protection and business success aren't opposing forces." She paused. "And personally, I've been thinking about what Eleanor said about legacy." "The Richards are obsessed with legacy," Daniel noted. "Not just the Richards," Alexandra replied softly, placing a hand briefly against her abdomen. "I've been thinking about what kind of world I want to help create for future generations." "Our future generation." Daniel's expression transformed with dawning understanding. "Are you saying—" Alexandra nodded, excitement and vulnerability mingling in her smile. 8 weeks along, I just confirmed it yesterday." Their embrace beneath the Washington monuments symbolized everything Alexandra had fought for: the right to build a life, and legacy based on authenticity rather than manipulation, transparency rather than deception. In the distance, the lights of power still burned in corporate boardrooms and government offices. The battles for environmental justice and corporate accountability continued. But Alexandra Pierce had discovered the most important truth of all: that even the most perfectly constructed illusions eventually shatter against unwavering integrity, and from those fragments, something genuine and lasting can emerge. Fim. Ta Historia. Dear listeners, we hope Alexandra's journey from betrayal to triumph has touched your hearts. Her story reminds us that integrity can overcome even the most powerful deception, and that true strength comes from transforming pain into purpose. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it by clicking to your left. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Every day we bring unique narratives that explore life's complexities and the resilience of the human